Rendezvous with Rama by Arthur C. Clarke is our first book. Memory is slightly foggy, but that is potentially a symptom of the fact that this book was not quite as thrilling and engrossing as it seems to be for a lot of people. For me, that might have to do with the fact that I read Eon by Greg Bear first, which derived a great deal, the lion's share of its world building and even plotting, from Rendezvous with Rama. It was perfectly fine, serviceable. It was a flavor of science fiction that I don't seek out that much anymore. Not that I've grown out of it or whatever, but it's just not my particular flavor. This sort of, I don't mean this to be derogatory, but slightly vanilla, hard science fiction with a big focus on the science part of that binomial, the science fiction. It's about a big asteroid-shaped thing that comes into the solar system, is tracking towards the sun, and a team of human astronauts, researchers, lands on it and goes inside of it and tries to figure out the mystery of where it came from, where it's going, and if it's still inhabited by aliens. People on my Discord were saying that this was a great gateway book into the genre, and I can certainly see that being the case. Reading it now, I found it a little bit forgettable, a little bit soft around the edges. The ending was wonderful. The ending was really great. Clarke writes really excellent endings, and I've now read the big three from him. This, 2001, which is coming up next, and Childhood's End. All three of them have excellent endings. And Clarke is not afraid of huge scope for his stories, which I really like. There were, I guess, prose highs in 2001 that were missing from this, to my memory. This was just slightly more generic and narrower in focus. Characters were sort of Twilight Zone television, simple, not memorable. I don't remember. I think I remember like 2 characters out of all of them. And the concepts at play were kind of interesting. I think I gave this a 7 out of 10. That feels about right to me. Certainly didn't dislike it, but I'm not infatuated with it. And of course, as I foreshadowed, 2001, A Space Odyssey, also by Arthur C. Clarke, I read next. This one took me a little longer to finish, and I like it more than Rendezvous with Rama. Rama is more coherent. It's a more cohesive narrative than 2001, but I think that's one of 2001's strengths. It begins with a passage, a relatively long part of the book, that's about the primitive ape men from the beginning of the film. And of course, this was written at the same time as Clarke wrote the screenplay, or co-wrote the screenplay with Kubrick. Or there might be some hazy chronology there. They were written roughly at the same time. For important context, I haven't seen the film. I haven't seen the movie since I was a kid, and I was bored by it when I was a kid, which I think is a good thing. So I came to this with fresh eyes, as they say in the biz. I like the beginning part quite a lot. The middle bit, which is about 2 researchers living on a spaceship on its way to Jupiter, was it? With Hal, the AI, which is mostly what I remember from the movie and what I think it's most famously associated with in terms of the imagery. That part was forgettable to me, and the resolution of that conflict wasn't that exciting. And then the book moves on to the best part of it, which is the ending, which is the confrontation with an alien intelligence that is quite spectacular. And Clarke reached farther in this than he did in Rama. The scale is bigger. The prose is more beautiful. It's more authorial when he's not digging into the nuts and bolts of the hard SF exposition, which I found kind of boring. And there is quite a bit of it in here. But his descriptions of big starscapes and planets are really vivid and good and easy to picture. I still have lingering images in my mind of those passages. And the ending itself is great, is really good. I, once more, I'm not going to put this in my top 15 list. I don't think it got all that close to the top 15. But I have really nothing negative to say about it. Next, we encountered The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. And what a hair-raising encounter it was. I don't like Heinlein. I don't want to not like Heinlein. It's not a convenient opinion to have as a science fiction opinionator or fan. Someone's going to come in, many people are going to come into the comments and tell me, oh, you just need to read Stranger, you just need to read Double Star, you just need to read XYZ, and then you can form an opinion about Heinlein. No, I don't need to, and I've already formed my opinion about Heinlein. I don't like Heinlein. And I went into this with a genuinely open mind, wanting to like it, and I just couldn't do it. Heinlein simply is not for me. I don't share his politics, but that's not the reason why I don't like this. This gets pilloried by a lot of people as being libertarian propaganda, which it kind of is, but I knew that going into it, and whatever. Like, if I can suspend my disbelief to read any of these books, I can suspend my disbelief that there is such a thing as a libertarian utopia on the moon. I can take that and set it aside and just come to the book on its own terms. Not the reason I really can't read him. I can't read him because his prose is bad. It's often bad. It's bad in this. It wasn't bad in Orphans in the Sky, but this feels a lot like The Cat Who Walked Through Walls, which I tried to read and I found it like disgusting. Just in terms of how try-hard the prose was, it's so self-consciously clever. It feels like he wrote one sentence at a time, trying to just crank the volume up on his own ingenuity and his own cleverness and preciousness with each sentence. It's about a lunar colony that is like a company town for the Earth government. There's like a United Nations equivalent governing body, like a confederation of Earth states on the planet that has the moon in a position of economic servitude where they're just a farm, like a mining colony with no autonomy, no self-determination. And there's a cabal of lunarites, or moonies, what are they called? Something. There's like a band of people on the moon who get together to plot the overthrow, to foment a revolution and cast off the yoke of oppression of the state from Earth and be self-governing in a libertarian utopia of polygamists in which there is no codified set of laws and justice is administered by impromptu kangaroo courts and hallways. There's a computer used by the administrative body on the moon that is hyper-intelligent and becomes self-aware, and this fact is only known by the protagonist, who's a mechanic, a Russian mechanic or technician who is not in a position of a special privilege, but comes to be at the forefront of this revolutionary action. It's painfully long. It is painfully slow. The prose was agony to me. I really hated it. It was written in the voice of the Russian protagonist, in a Russian voice, so there are conjunctions missing in the construction of the sentences, of most of the sentences. I found it to be a gimmick. I found it to be a distraction, and it made already unappealing prose more unappealing and more obnoxious to me. Heinlein also has earned his reputation of being a dirty old man. There's a kind of lecherous horniness in this that I find just obnoxious. Like, I am not opposed to horniness in literature. I have read some hair-raising stuff. I have read Hog, or part of it, by Samuel Delany. I read Welbeck. I read Bukowski. I read these people. I read horny people. Heinlein is the most, like, at least in this, the most, like being called into the principal's office and being inappropriately touched kind of horniness. It's really, it's like eating a donut that was dropped in sand or something. It just interjects itself in parts where it's completely irrelevant and adds nothing and is a total distraction. It's in there just for the sake of being lecherous. It's hard to describe exactly why it's why it is so bothersome. I think the only thing that I actually liked in this was Mike the AI as a character and the relationship between Mike and the protagonist. I thought it was well written. It wasn't anything particularly profound, but it was funny in parts. I liked Heinlein's use of Mike as a propaganda tool. There's some interesting, essentially deep faking that goes on. The bits about how to organize a revolutionary cell to avoid detection by the authorities was interesting. Everything else, I don't care. It was a chore, and it's going to be a long time before I pick up another Heinlein. I just don't like him. I just simply don't like him. I think I gave this like a 4 out of 10. Then I read I, Robot, as Asimov would have pronounced it. This is a fix-up novel, kind of, barely. It's really just a collection of short stories. There's a teeny tiny bit of interstitial narrative kind of woven in there with one of the characters. Before this, I had really only read the Foundation trilogy, the original Foundation trilogy by Asimov. And I love 2 of those books. The first 2, I think, are wonderful. These were not as elegant. They're not as sophisticated. They're not unsophisticated, but these have aged more poorly than Foundation, and the authorial voice is weaker in this than in Foundation. Weaker in that it is more overpowering. Asimov is really a chatty writer. He has a ton of dialogue in his stories, and the dialogue in a lot of these stories is it's really dated, really hackneyed, and it's like almost vaudeville. It's like watching or listening to Laurel and Hardy or something along those lines. Kind of knocks you out of the story. The stories are little thought experiments revolving around the 3 laws of robotics, which we've probably all heard. And I'm just going to hand wave it aside like that because I can't name them off the top of my head, and that way I get to sound smart. I think it's robots. Robots are not allowed to harm human beings. Robots are not allowed, through their own inaction, to allow a human being to come to harm. And robots must seek to preserve their own lives, right? Isn't that the thing? It follows the development of robotics from its earliest incipient stages up through the ages until it becomes the water in which the world swims. That narrative sweep has a foretaste of the sense of scale that Foundation does. And obviously this is not the only book in this series, followed by Caves of Steel, then the other robot books. I haven't read any of them. I hear Caves of Steel is much better than this. But there is an invitation to a much larger world in the stories. The stories themselves are generally not, I didn't love them. I just found them, again, vanilla. And they were all very cut and dry. Just, we're going to run through one of these laws of robotics through these specific parameters, and any kind of like narrative flourish or character work is incidental to just kind of teasing out how such and such variable would play out in such and such circumstance, which didn't really make for that great of reading to me. There were a couple stories that I liked, specifically actually the one that was turned into the movie, which I think is called Little Lost Robot. I thought the last story wasn't like that rousing of a tale, but it plays with some really interesting ideas. And I remember Liar being a good story. I don't remember why. I don't remember anything about it, but I liked it, I guess. Piece of required reading that I thought was fine. Glad to have read it. I don't think that I'm that eager to read it again necessarily, but I did it. I ate my broccoli. I think I gave this like 6 out of 10. And The Gods Themselves by Asimov, the final one. So if you haven't picked up on a theme, the whole point of this chunk was to read 5 of the hard SF classics that I had not read. And I thought, what I figured when I went into it was that I would save the best for last, because this is regarded as like his great literary work. This is supposed to be the best book that he's written. And I thought like, yes, this one's going to kick ass and I'll finish on a bang. And I think I figured I would like these more than I did. So, did I love The Gods Themselves? Kind of. I think the first half of it is phenomenal. Is probably Asimov as strong as I've read him. Having, you know, read the hits. Some of them. He had many hits. Opens, well, it's comprised of 3 novellas that were serialized, I think in Galaxy, if I remember correctly. And they are related, but are 3 very distinct stories. The first one is about a researcher, a human scientist, who accidentally discovers a way to have interdimensional contact with aliens, and I won't spoil how. The rest of the book follows on from the consequences of that discovery, and the first part of it I think is probably the best because it's a comedic, satiric depiction of science as the domain of blowhard, egotist assholes. Seemingly every major breakthrough in science is a direct consequence of the researcher prosecuting some perceived slight from another scientific rival. So science is driven by a need for revenge and a need for glory and fame. And it's really deftly handled. It's really well. It's also an exciting piece of plotting. I think this is Asimov, certainly at his funniest, Asimov at his most adept as a novelist. The middle book starts out really strong. It's not played for comedy. It's told from the point of view of aliens, and it's an examination of alien biology and alien psychology and sociology. It's like a coming-of-age story. Great world building, interesting aliens. There was even one part that really hit me in the old sternum, made me tear up a little bit, actually, which I didn't expect from Asimov. So starts out, again, right out of the gate, strong. About halfway through this part of the book, there's a big unanswered question at the heart of it, and Asimov does a little bit of foreshadowing, and it seems like he becomes so infatuated with the act of foreshadowing that he just starts just doing it as much as he possibly can. And it evacuates all of the suspense out of it because it's just so clearly obvious that he's pointing your nose right at the very obvious, all of a sudden, resolution of this mystery. And he just can't stop winking at you as the reader, and it sucks because it just, oh man, he had it. He just was so close to writing a piece of world building, of like weirdo alien world building that it felt very Silverbergian to me. It felt on that level. It was really great. And then he just drops all of his marbles. And then it gets really redundant. It just kind of circles the drain for a while, and it coasts into the exact ending that you think is awaiting you, and there it is, and then it's over. Then part 3 of the book takes place on the moon, on a lunar colony, occupied by sexual libertines. What could this be an homage to? It's somehow even more boring than Moon is a Harsh Mistress in this section. I truly could not bring myself to care at all about what was going on. And it was wrapping up loose threads from the first book. Didn't care about anything until the last few pages. I just simply could not care. It was so dry and so dull. The characters were so uninteresting, and just kind of having chatty Asimov chat. It felt like being trapped in the elevator with the 2 principal characters for like an hour. And then there's some cool stuff that wraps up everything right at the end. Some cool ideas, some hard SF, big picture stuff. So an uneven book. I think that it is worth reading. I certainly don't think that it's his best book. I think Foundation trounces it. But Asimov has flashes of greatness. The thing that I will say on behalf of Asimov is that I feel that his influence is still the most strongly felt out of any of these three. Heinlein, I don't get Heinlein flavors from nearly anything that I read, even following on close after his period of popularity in like this, you know, the 70s, 80s. Heinlein's tone kind of just vanishes to me. Maybe it's because I don't read that much military SF or whatever, but he just kind of fades into the background. Clarke doesn't have a strong enough character, I guess, that it would be detectable. Again, like it's he's like lentils, you know, very nutritious, good. You can't say anything bad about lentils really, but if you were hard pressed in like a blind taste test to identify lentils, the taste of lentils, if they were put in your mouth, like it would be hard to do. That feels like Clarke to me. Asimov is strawberry yogurt, strong, often pleasant, but slightly divisive flavor that is definitely consistently apparent, certainly through the new wave stuff, iRobot. You can just see the direct through line to something like City by Simak, the direct through line to Philip K. Dick. All of this, all these ideas about technology, the intersection between technology and psychology and sociology. This is bedrock sort of material for a lot of works that followed Asimov that I do prefer. Asimov's books do feel more like, or taste more like, foods that I do prefer and authors and books that I think are better. Having said that, however, I think in terms of these 5 books, Clarke is a clear winner. I think 2001 was probably the best of this batch that I read. Rendezvous with Rama, pretty close behind. Didn't mean to come in here and tip over Sacred Cows. That wasn't the point. In fact, I'm a little disappointed that I didn't like these a little more than I did. But it also confirmed a suspicion that I had, which is that this kind of hard SF sort of isn't for me. I have learned from this that I really value strong authorial voice, and I value beautiful prose very highly. And I felt like I was maybe just being bitter or something, or being a contrarian for the sake of being a contrarian, as I made my way through these and didn't really love them that much. Then I picked up a Bob Shaw book. I'm about 2 chapters into Other Days, Other Eyes, which was recommended on Outlaw Booksellers channel as his best book and one of the best SF books ever written. And I'm 2 chapters in, and I, you know, like borderline want to weep for how beautiful it is. I mean, how potent that prose is. And he was a hard SF writer, and it's a night and day difference from these to that. That one is that sort of hard SF, or that species of SF that is prose driven. I'm finding that to be my particular poison. And I think that if I came into SF reading one of these or reading a couple of these based on their classic status, I think I would have bounced off the genre probably. So I will be doing 3 book chunks from here on out. So you will have more frequent updates, and also these books will be fresher in my mind, and I will have more to talk about and remember about them. I would like to recommend a podcast to you. It's called SFUltra. My friend Sean made it. I would be recommending it even if it weren't my friend Sean. He's doing essentially what I'm doing, the 100 book challenge, except the difference is he's a long-standing professional podcaster who's been podcasting for years and years and years, is a hilarious guy, insightful, and he doesn't like science fiction, or he spent, you know, his most of his life as a reader not liking science fiction, and has undertaken this project to read 100 science fiction books and talk about them one at a time in long form, like half-hour-long podcasts. They're so brilliant. They're so funny. And he's doing a freemium thing where SFUltra is an episode-by-episode free podcast that's just about the science fiction books. And then he's doing supplemental paid material on Patreon called Perfect Taste Forever, where he will recommend, he'll talk about one specific, not necessarily book, piece of media to recommend. There will be a link in the description give SFUltra a shot. If you like it, I'd recommend that you do sign up for the Patreon because Perfect Taste Forever is hilarious. I would be a paid subscriber even if I didn't have fondness for Sean and a personal connection with him. He didn't ask me to do this. He doesn't know that I'm doing it. Even just as a science fiction fan, I think it's, I don't listen to a lot of science fiction podcasts or really any, but I can't imagine that there's one that's funnier and more clever than SFUltra. So check it out. And I will see you soon.